Before we begin, here's a question to sit with. Have you ever been replaced by someone who understood nothing about what you actually brought, and then watched the person who replaced you discover, too late, exactly what they gave up? Drop your answer in the comments as you listen. Derek Cole had built his wealth over 20 years on one principle above all others. Understand the numbers before anyone else in the room does. He was exceptional at this. He had applied this intelligence to markets, to acquisitions, to the specific architecture of risk and return that had made Cole Enterprises one of the most profitable private companies in the Southeast. What he had failed to apply it to was his own marriage. Specifically, he had failed to apply it to his wife. Kezia Cole was a financial strategist who had spent 12 years quietly understanding every layer of how her husband's money moved. Not because she was planning anything, but because she was the kind of woman who understood everything she was adjacent to. When Derek replaced her with a woman 20 years younger, Kezia took that understanding with her. And when the time came, when she had thought about it carefully and decided that the right response was not a confrontation but a consequence, she made a call. The woman who answered that call was exceptional at what she did. She arrived in Derek's life in the way that certain disasters arrive, beautifully, without warning. And she was gone before he had finished counting what was missing. There is a specific kind of underestimation that costs everything. Not the underestimation of someone's emotion. Not the underestimation of their willingness to fight or argue or make a scene. Those kinds of underestimation are recoverable. The dangerous kind is the underestimation of someone's intelligence, of their specific, accumulated, 12-year understanding of exactly how your money is structured and where the vulnerabilities are, and what a person with the right skills and the right introduction could do if they chose to move through those vulnerabilities with precision. Derek Cole did not know what Kezia knew. He knew she was smart. He had always known she was smart. He had simply decided, somewhere across the years of their marriage, that her intelligence was in service of his world rather than in possession of its own. He was wrong about that. This is a story about what that specific wrongness cost him. If you have ever been quietly underestimated by someone who should have known better, this story is yours. Before we begin, one ask, if this story finds something true in you today, right? She knew the numbers in the comments. Let this family know you are here. Now, let us begin. Derek Cole had built Cole Enterprises the way men of his particular kind build things, through a combination of genuine market intelligence, disciplined execution, and the specific ruthlessness of someone who understood that the difference between a good opportunity and a great one was almost always timing. He had grown up in Charlotte, North Carolina, the son of a building contractor who had never quite scaled his business beyond regional, and a mother who had worked as a bank teller for 22 years and who had given Derek, through years of dinner table conversation about loans and rates and compound interest, an early and thorough education in how money behaved when it was handled correctly. He had gone to NC State on a partial scholarship, graduated with a degree in finance, spent 4 years at an investment bank in Atlanta, and founded Cole Enterprises at 30 with a private equity focus on southeastern commercial real estate and logistics infrastructure. 20 years later, Cole Enterprises had a portfolio valued at approximately $2.4 billion. His name was known in the rooms where these things mattered. He had been featured in 3 regional business publications in the past 2 years. He had a board of 7, a CFO he had worked with for 11 years, and a communications operation that managed his public presence with the quiet efficiency of people who understood they were protecting something that required protection. He was 51 years old. He was also, as of 8 months ago, separated from his wife of 12 years and in a relationship with a woman named Talia, who was 31 and who worked in brand strategy, and who had entered his life at the specific moment when he had been most susceptible to the particular kind of attention she offered. He had told himself the marriage had run its course. He had told himself Kezia had been pulling away for years. He had told himself these things in the specific, careful language of a man who needed a story that would allow him to keep thinking well of himself while doing something he knew was not good. The story had certain significant gaps in it. The largest gap was Kezia herself. Kezia Cole was 43 years old. She had grown up in Baltimore, the daughter of a forensic accountant father who had spent 30 years finding money that other people had hidden, and a mother who had been a financial aid administrator at Johns Hopkins for 25 years. Her parents had, between them, given her an education in the specific mechanics of how money moved through institutions and what it revealed about the people who moved it. She had a degree in economics from Howard University and a master's in financial engineering from MIT. She had spent 6 years as a financial strategist at one of the largest investment banks on the East Coast before leaving to consult independently and eventually to focus on her own investment portfolio, which she managed with the same surgical precision she brought to everything. She had met Derek at an industry conference in Charlotte when she was 30. He had been drawn to her the way certain men are drawn to women who understand the same things they understand, with the specific attraction of recognizing a peer. He had been right that she was a peer. He had subsequently spent 12 years treating her like a support structure rather than one. She had built her own investment portfolio across those 12 years that had nothing to do with Derek and everything to do with her own judgment about where capital should be deployed. She had also, simply by being the person she was and by living alongside the person he was, developed a comprehensive and detailed understanding of Cole Enterprises' financial architecture, its account structures, its banking relationships, its liquidity positions, the specific vulnerabilities that existed in any complex private company's financial infrastructure when you looked at it with the right training. She had not looked at it with the intention of ever using that understanding. Until Derek replaced her. Not with one woman, with a progression of them. Talia had been the one he had left for, the one who had made the marriage's ending official. But Kezia had been watching the pattern develop for 2 years before the ending. The business trips that had stopped being purely business, the specific emotional withdrawal of a man who was investing his attention somewhere else. She had said something once. He had managed the conversation. She had said something twice. He had managed that one too. By the third time, she had understood that management was the only tool he had available and that no conversation was going to produce a different result. She had retained an attorney. She had reviewed the prenuptial agreement. She had begun the process of organizing her own financial position. And she had made a call to a woman named Sasha Williams. Sasha Williams was 36 years old. She was not a criminal. Not because she was performing anything, but because she was genuinely intelligent, genuinely charming, and genuinely expert at making the kind of man who had spent his entire life being the smartest person in the room feel that they had found someone worth talking to. She and Kezia had known each other for 9 years through a network of Black women finance professionals in Atlanta. They were not close friends. They were women who understood each other's intelligence and had occasionally found each other useful. Kezia had called Sasha on a Thursday evening in November. She had said, "I need to talk to you about something. Not a favor. A business proposition. I want you to meet someone." Sasha had said, "Tell me more." Kezia had told her more. There had been a silence on the phone. Then Sasha had said, "Send me the relevant information." Kezia had sent the relevant information. Sasha had reviewed it for 3 days. Then she had called back and said, "I am in." The introduction had been arranged with the specific care of a woman who understood that the most effective arrangements are the ones that do not look like arrangements. Derek attended a quarterly investor reception in Atlanta in December, a regular calendar event that brought together regional private equity principals and their banking and legal contacts. He had attended this event for 11 of the past 12 years. It was the kind of event where new contacts were made in the natural course of industry networking and where nothing unusual about a new acquaintance would register because meeting new people was the entire point. Sasha had been introduced to the event through a legitimate contact, a private banker who owed Kezia a professional courtesy and who had been asked, simply, to add a name to the guest list. No explanation given. No explanation required. Derek had met Sasha near the drink station at 8:15. She had been speaking to 2 other men when he arrived, and she had made the specific transition from that conversation to this one with the graceful efficiency of someone who was not performing interest but was genuinely present with whoever she was talking to. She knew the industry. She knew the terminology. She asked questions that were intelligent without being competitive and made observations that were incisive without being threatening to the kind of man who needed to feel that his perspective was the most valuable in a conversation. Derek had stayed in that conversation for 45 minutes. He had gotten her card. He had called her the following Tuesday. Their first dinner had been at a restaurant in Buckhead that he had chosen. Expensive, private, the kind of place where significant people were not unusual, and where discretion was part of the service. She had arrived exactly on time. She had ordered without consulting him about the menu. She had opinions about the current private equity landscape that were specific and defensible. She had a read on two emerging southeastern markets that differed slightly from his own, and that she argued with the specific, unhurried confidence of someone who had done the analysis and was not going to soften it to make him comfortable. He had found this genuinely compelling. He had told himself he was meeting a professional equal. He was simply not the one in control of the meeting. By the fourth dinner, he had begun talking about the company. Not sensitive specifics, not account numbers, but the shape of things, the portfolio structure, the current capital allocation priorities, the specific banking relationships that underpinned the company's liquidity position. Sasha listened with the complete focused attention of someone filing everything carefully. She asked a question here and there. She did not ask the specific questions she actually needed answered. She asked adjacent questions. Questions about adjacent topics that, when combined with what Kezia had already provided, completed the picture she needed to begin understanding the specific architecture of where Derek's liquid assets lived. She had the picture by the sixth dinner. She spent 3 weeks with the picture before she moved. Not because she needed 3 weeks technically. Because she needed to be certain that when she moved, there was no version of the resulting situation that could be traced cleanly back to Kezia. She reviewed the structure 3 times. On a Monday morning in February, she began. The specific mechanics of what Sasha did across the following 8 days were the specific mechanics of a woman who understood the intersection of financial systems, personal trust, and the particular credulity of a powerful man who has decided that a new relationship exists outside the rules he applies to everything else in his life. She did not hack anything. She did not break any laws she could be clearly prosecuted for. She used information that had been shared with her voluntarily across 6 dinners by a man who had mistaken the warmth of her attention for personal trust and had deployed that personal trust in the direction of professional vulnerability. She began with the most accessible position. Derek had given her access to a shared expense account, not the company accounts, a personal one. Because he had suggested a trip and she had declined to use his card, and he had created a shared access arrangement that he had been meaning to restructure but had not gotten around to. The shared access account was a beginning, not the end. What it gave her was a window. Not into the account itself, which had a relatively modest balance, but into the banking relationship, the institution, the specific documentation patterns of a man who had built his financial life at a single banking group across 22 years. What she needed from that window she obtained across 3 careful days. Then she moved to the next position. Derek had mentioned, across the 6 dinners, a specific private banking arrangement he maintained at an institution in Charlotte. Mentioned it the way people mention things they consider permanent and unremarkable, the kind of arrangement that had been in place for so long it felt like furniture. Furniture, Sasha had found across 15 years of working adjacent to wealth, was where wealthy people kept their most significant vulnerabilities. She did not break into that arrangement. She did not need to. She used the documentation window she had obtained from the first position to verify her identity in a way that Derek had inadvertently made possible by combining personal and professional contact in a manner his own security protocols should have prevented. On a Thursday evening in February, she moved what could be moved. It was considerable. Derek called her on Friday morning. The call went to a number that still existed but was answered by a voicemail that had not been there on Thursday. He called again. He sent a message. He waited 2 hours and called again. He drove to the address she had given him, an apartment in Midtown Atlanta that he had been to twice. The name on the buzzer was different from the one he knew. The building manager told him the previous tenant had moved out 6 days ago. He called his personal banker. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. He sat in his car outside the Midtown Atlanta apartment building for a long time after that call. She had not taken everything. This was important, and it was not accidental. A complete taking would have crossed specific legal lines that Sasha had no interest in crossing, lines that would have produced criminal exposure that was not part of what she was willing to accept as a professional risk. What she had taken was significant but targeted. The personal accounts, the private banking arrangement in Charlotte, 2 investment positions that had been held in structures that were personally rather than corporately registered, positions that Derek had maintained outside the company's formal portfolio because they were personal capital deployments he had not wanted on the company's books. The company's accounts were untouched. The company's banking relationships were untouched. Cole Enterprises was not damaged. Derek Cole was considerably lighter. His personal attorney estimated the loss in a phone call the following Monday morning and delivered the number with the specific, careful professionalism of someone who has been doing high-net-worth legal work long enough to deliver terrible news in a way that does not cause the client to collapse before the conversation is useful. The number was significant, not ruinous. Cole Enterprises was not a personal account, and its value was not accessible through what had happened, but significant enough that the specific investments Derek had been planning to make with his personal capital in the first quarter were no longer possible, and the specific lifestyle infrastructure he had built around his personal accounts was going to require rearrangement. His CFO Thomas received the relevant information the following day and sat with it for 24 hours before coming to Derek's office, with the specific expression of a man who has been reviewing something carefully and has arrived at questions he does not know how to ask. He said, "I need to understand the structure of the Charlotte arrangement." Derek said, "It was personal." Thomas said, "I know, but the specific documentation that enabled the access. Some of what I am seeing suggests that the documentation came from within the company's banking relationship." Derek said nothing. Thomas said, "Derek, did you use the company's banking infrastructure in your personal arrangement with this woman?" A long silence. Derek said, "There may have been some overlap." Thomas looked at him. He said, "How did she know about the Charlotte arrangement?" Derek said nothing. Thomas said, "Who told her?" Derek still said nothing, but he was beginning to understand. He called his personal attorney, and then a forensic accountant, and then a private investigator. The private investigator spent 2 weeks working the case and delivered a report that was thorough and arrived at a conclusion that was simultaneously complete and professionally limited. The report confirmed that the woman Derek had known as Sasha Williams had operated under at least 3 different professional identities across the past 8 years in transactions that bore certain similarities to what Derek had experienced. The identities were clean, thoroughly documented, difficult to pierce, constructed with the specific care of someone who understood that the documentation was the product. The report could not identify a direct legal path. It could identify something else. The entry point. The investor reception in December. The private banker who had added the name to the guest list. The professional courtesy that had been owed. Derek's investigator had traced the courtesy to its source. The source was a professional relationship of Kezia's. Derek called his personal attorney. His attorney said, "This is circumstantial." Derek said, "It is her." His attorney said, "I understand you believe that. I am telling you that what we have is circumstantial, and that pursuing it formally is going to require you to disclose the personal account structures and the Charlotte arrangement in a legal context that is going to create additional problems for you." A long silence. His attorney said, "Derek, what you have here is a loss that is painful and that you cannot publicly pursue without compounding it. I strongly recommend you focus on the divorce settlement and move forward." Derek sat in his office for a long time. He thought about 12 years. He thought about Kezia at the Howard University conference where they had met, the specific quality of her intelligence, the way she had engaged with a panel topic with a precision that had made everyone else in the room sound approximate. He had known what she was. He had decided to treat her like something smaller. He sat with that for a very long time. The divorce proceedings were conducted with the specific, businesslike efficiency of 2 people who had been advised by competent attorneys and who had arrived, through different routes, at the same conclusion, that the most useful outcome was a clean and properly documented resolution. Kezia's attorney was a woman named Patricia Osei who had been practicing family law in Atlanta for 22 years and who had never once, in a career that had produced a great many stories, encountered a situation that she could not navigate to a clear outcome. She navigated this one. The prenuptial agreement was thorough and had been drafted by attorneys who had thought carefully about the range of outcomes it needed to address. The infidelity provisions were operative. The marital asset division was clear. What Kezia was entitled to was specifically identified and properly valued. She walked away with the primary residence in Buckhead, a property she had chosen, decorated, and made into the specific kind of home that her taste produced. She walked away with her personal investment portfolio, which had grown across 12 years of her own management into something that required no help from the divorce settlement to be significant. She walked away with a financial settlement. She walked away with her consulting practice, which had continued operating throughout the marriage and the separation with the quiet consistency of something that had never depended on him. She did not walk away with anything that required Derek to have been a better person. She walked away with what had always been hers. Midpoint question for you. Have you ever watched someone pay a price they could not publicly complain about? A price that arrived not through a court, but through the specific consequences of their own choices being reflected back at them, and felt, watching it, that justice sometimes moves in directions that the law cannot always follow. Derek did not know what to do with what he suspected. He could not prove it. He could not pursue it without exposing himself. He could not confront Kezia directly without the conversation becoming the kind of conversation that his attorney had explicitly advised against having outside of the formal legal process. He sat with it. He thought about the investor reception. He thought about the guest list edition. He thought about 6 dinners in Buckhead and a woman who had known the right questions to not ask directly and the right proximity to create just enough exposure. He thought about Kezia at the Howard conference. The specific quality of her intelligence. He thought about 12 years of underestimating it. He thought about one specific evening, about 3 years into the marriage, when Kezia had presented him with a detailed analysis of Cole Enterprises' banking relationship structure that had identified 3 specific vulnerabilities that his CFO had subsequently confirmed were real and had spent 6 months addressing. He had thanked her. He had not asked her how she had seen what his CFO had not. He had not thought to wonder what else she saw. He sat in his office on a Tuesday afternoon with the specific, irreversible understanding of a man who had been holding something exceptional and had decided to treat it as furniture. He had not lost everything, but he had lost enough. And the most specific and irrecoverable thing he had lost was not the Charlotte account or the investment positions or the personal capital that was now in a configuration he could not trace. It was the knowledge that the woman he had replaced, the woman he had decided was manageable and secondary and available to be exchanged for something newer, had known exactly what he had understood it at a level that exceeded almost everyone he paid to understand it, had watched him make a decision that would have consequences and had simply waited, with the composed, patient intelligence of someone who understood that the consequences were built into the decision. For the consequences to arrive, he had replaced her. She had made a call. And that was the specific, elegant, completely untraceable thing about it. She had not done anything to him. She had simply made a call. And the person who answered the call had done what they did. And the money was gone. And his company was fine. And Kezia was in the Buckhead property with her investment portfolio, and her consulting practice, and her settlement, and her complete, unhurried dignity. And he was sitting in an office that still bore his name on the building thinking about a Howard University conference 23 years ago, and a woman who had understood something about the panel topic that had made everyone else sound approximate. She moved back into the Buckhead property on a Saturday in March. She had been staying at a hotel during the final weeks of the divorce proceedings. Not because she had been asked to leave, but because she had decided that the specific daily environment of a shared home that was in the process of becoming no longer shared was not a useful environment for the kind of clear thinking she needed to do. She had moved through those hotel weeks with the organized, forward-moving efficiency she brought to everything. She had reviewed her investment portfolio. She had taken 3 new consulting clients. She had reorganized the financial structure of her own holdings in the specific way of someone who has been living within the financial architecture of another person's world and is now returning to the specific clarity of their own. When she moved back into the Buckhead property on the Saturday in March, she walked through the rooms with the specific attention of someone taking inventory, not of what he had left behind, but of what was hers. The art on the walls was hers. Chosen, curated, each piece selected because she believed in it rather than because it communicated status. The library was hers, built across 12 years of specific, purposeful reading that covered the disciplines of her work and the interests that existed outside it. The garden was hers, planted and tended through 12 years of Saturday mornings that had been the most consistently restorative part of her week regardless of what the rest of the week had contained. She walked through the rooms. She sat in the kitchen. She made coffee. She called her closest friend Dara. Dara answered on the first ring and said, "Tell me." Kezia said, "I am home." Dara said, "How does it feel?" Kezia looked around the kitchen she had designed. The specific warm light she had chosen, the countertops she had selected after 3 weeks of deliberation, the herbs in the window that she had been tending since they moved in. She said, "It feels like myself." Dara said, "Good." Kezia said, "Yes." They talked for an hour. Kezia made a second cup of coffee. She sat in the kitchen that was hers, and she thought about the past year, and what it had produced, and what she had, and what it had cost her to get here. She had not walked away unscathed. 12 years was 12 years, and it had contained real things. The real version of Derek that she had married and the real love that had existed before the accumulated small decisions of a man who equated acquisition with value had eroded it. She had grieved that. She had done the grieving privately and completely, and she was not going to revise the grief downward to make herself look less affected than she had been. She had been affected. She was not broken. She had also made a call. She had thought about that call for 6 weeks before she made it. She had thought about it from every angle. The what and the why and the whether, and the what does this say about who you are. What she had arrived at was this. She had not taken anything from Derek. She had placed a woman with a specific skill set in the path of a man who had already demonstrated that he would expose his vulnerabilities to the wrong person, and she had allowed that demonstration to proceed at a scale that was proportional to the specific underestimation he had been operating under. She had not arranged a crime. She had arranged a consequence. The distinction mattered to her. She sat in her kitchen in the March morning light, and she thought about her father, the forensic accountant who had spent 30 years finding money other people had hidden. He had said to her once, when she was 12 years old, and he was explaining what he did for a living, "Money does not lie, Kezia. It just moves. And if you watch where it moves, it will always tell you the truth about the person who moved it." She had been watching. For 12 years, she had been watching. 6 months later, Kezia accepted a position as chief financial strategist at a regional private equity firm, a role that had been offered to her twice before and which she had declined because the timing had not been right. The timing was right now. She brought to the role the specific, accumulated intelligence of 12 years of watching how a complex private company breathed, where its money lived and how it moved, and what the difference was between a company that was as healthy as it appeared and one that was carrying vulnerabilities that only someone with the right training could see. Her new colleagues described her as the most precise financial mind they had encountered in a career full of precise financial minds. She was not surprised by this. She had always known what she was. She had simply been in a situation for 12 years where the person who should have known it best had decided that knowing her in that way was less useful than having her. She had left that situation. She was in the right situation now. She sat at her new desk in her new office on a Tuesday morning in September, and she worked. Not for him. Not to prove anything. Simply because the work was hers, and she was good at it, and she was exactly where she had always been going. She had just taken a 12-year detour to remind someone what they were losing before they lost it. She opened the first file. She went to work. Derek restructured. It took him 4 months. He moved capital from the company's retained earnings, carefully, transparently, with Thomas's oversight and proper documentation, to rebuild the personal liquidity position that had been removed. It was possible. It was not painless. The specific investments he had been planning with the personal capital, a real estate position in Nashville he had been tracking for 2 years, a technology logistics play that had a narrow entry window, were not available at the same terms 4 months later. One of them had closed entirely. The other had moved. He had not lost the company. He had lost opportunities. He had lost the specific position of someone whose personal capital was entirely liquid and available for deployment at the moment the right moment arrived. That position, in Derek's world, was the position that separated the good decisions from the great ones. He understood, sitting in his office on a Thursday afternoon in May reviewing the restructuring that Thomas had completed, that the specific advantage he had spent 20 years building, the advantage of being in the right position at the right time with the available capital to move, had been removed from him cleanly and precisely, and without leaving a name that went anywhere clean. He thought about Kezia's father. He had met the man twice. A quiet, precise man who had spent 30 years finding money other people had hidden. He thought about what that man had spent 30 years teaching his daughter. He sat in his office for a long time. He did not call Kezia. Not because he did not want to. Because he had enough self-awareness to understand that the conversation he wanted to have, the one where he acknowledged what he believed had happened and what it said about what he had thrown away, was not a conversation she owed him and not one that would produce anything except a reminder of what his choices had cost. She owed him nothing. She had never owed him the intelligence she brought. She had brought it anyway for 12 years, while he had decided her value in other terms. He had found out what the intelligence was worth. The lesson had been expensive. He suspected it had been designed to be. Derek Cole replaced his wife with younger women. He told himself the story that men tell themselves when they do this, that the marriage had run its course, that they had both changed, that the new thing was real and the old thing was finished. What he did not tell himself, because telling himself would have required acknowledging what he was giving up, was that he was replacing the most financially intelligent person in his orbit with someone who found him compelling, because finding him compelling was useful to her. Kezia Cole took the prenuptial settlement she was entitled to. She took her investment portfolio. She took her consulting practice. She took her house. She also made a call. And the woman who answered that call moved through the specific vulnerabilities of Derek Cole's financial architecture with the precision of someone who had been given an accurate map by the one person who had spent 12 years drawing it. She was gone before he understood what was missing. And Kezia was in her kitchen making coffee. And the number was what it was. And it could not be traced anywhere clean. The most dangerous thing about a financially brilliant woman is not her anger. It is her patience, and her memory, and her 12-year understanding of exactly where the money lives. Final question for you. Have you ever watched someone discover the true value of what they had? Not through a conversation, not through a warning, but through the specific, irreversible experience of its absence? Leave your answer below. Your voice belongs in this conversation. If this story found something real in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. One share. It costs nothing and means everything. I love you all. I will see you in the next story.